I think within Kenya and East and Central Africa, MEA is the only company that has been doing bulk blending over the years. And when we talk about bulk blending, you have two categories of fertilizer in Kenya. You have straight importations, and then you also have customized blends. And what we're seeing more and more nowadays is, as opposed to the past where we just imported fertilizer, regardless, straight fertilizers, manufactured in Europe and in Russia and what have you, now we're doing more customized blends. Because soils need different nutrition in form of nitrogen, phosphate, or potassium. So, unless you actually analyze the soil and know what that particular crop needs, you won't get the requisite yields that you require. If you look at, just as a broad example, if you look at, I'll take two sectors, I'll say tea and I'll take sugarcane manufacturing in Kenya. You've heard a lot of hula baloo about sugar in this country. One of the things is, it's not just the inefficiency of the mills, it's the fertilization of sugar industry in Kenya. The yields in Kenya have fallen by 52% on average in the cane sector. Now, if you look at countries like Mauritius or South Africa, they're consistently upgrading the varieties, but they also fertilize. So if you look at Kenya, for instance, it's always straight DAP application, then we apply urea after that in terms of fertilization. Now, if we were to analyze a bit more closely, we might see that the soils are actually depleted of certain nutrients. And we can only improve the sugar yields and the welfare of our farmers in this country if now we start applying more science and applying the right fertilizer. First, to do a physical blend, we use finished value-added product. If, for instance, I'm going to make an NPK formulation for a tea farmer somewhere in Uganda, we use a product like diammonium phosphate, urea, and a bit of potash. But it's the imported form. And now the imported form is going to be slightly more expensive. And a component of that phosphate, that the P in the NPK, is phosphate. Now, to make that physical blend, we do that currently. But the cost of that phosphate product, DAP, is anywhere of $510, $520. CFR Mombasa. That is the cost. This new plant, the difference with this new plant, we will now be able to use the rock phosphate directly imported from either Morocco or from, for instance, Saudi Arabia. And the cost of that is about $120. And that's going to be the fund of that phosphate.
From Morocco, let us say from Morocco.
From Morocco, from Saudi Arabia, yes. But now instead of
including the transport cost.
Because now we're importing the rock as opposed to the finished product. Yes. When you do a blend, you take the final product, then you mix that. Yes. But this one now we're taking the rock phosphate from the mines, so it's considerably cheaper. So it's 25% of the cost, basically, on the P component as well. We may not have as much savings on the nitrogenous and on the potash part, but generally, if you save, if we save anywhere of 50-65% on rock phosphate, I think that this will translate to considerably better prices for our farmers, both in Kenya and in the region. And principally, this is what has been the driving force with this new plant that we're setting up. It's been a very big challenge, not just for MEA, but also for other private sector players. However, having said that, we think it's a very good idea. Subsidy, if conducted well and fairly, can be very successful. If we look at, for instance, a country like Malawi, the subsidy has been very successful because it's a public-private partnership. And at the end of the day, you want good prices for your farmers. And this is why this has forced us as well, as a private company, to come up with this solution that I've told you about, granulation. So try and make product cheaper. However, having said that, subsidy can only benefit the farmer if private sector is also involved at some level, because it has to have that sustainability. Because all of us, whether it's government, whether it's private sector players, we're all buying from the same typical sources, and we're all landing product at the same price in Mombasa. We're all paying the same port charges and the same transport charges. But the challenge for private sector players, I can't bring in a product at $510 and sell it at $250 up country. I'd be going at a loss. Government can afford to do that for indefinitely. So I think for it to be truly sustainable in the long term, subsidy should be for the very, if you look at a country like Malawi where it's been successful, subsidy is for the farmer with 2 acres and less. That is when you have a direct impact, in terms of poverty eradication. You cannot subsidize a farmer with 1,000 acres or 500 acres. The farmer with 500 acres should really go into the private marketplace, buy his private inputs, because he's selling at a final output price that's reflective of his private sector sales. But for the 1 acre, 2 acre farmers, let's even say below 5 acres, this is the target market that should be now assisted by government, because that's where you really have the impact at that lower level. The supply of fertilizer was very steady into this market, but now if you're a private sector player and you don't know how much government is going to bring, you hold back on importing, or you import at a limited scale simply because you can't compete with government in the market. So what you find is, if you go across the board and you look at the statistics, imports of fertilizer have fallen, and if you go to the KPA records, you realize imports of fertilizer have fallen by a certain fraction over the last 3 or 4 years because of unpredictability. Private sector likes predictability because we've taken out loans and we're talking to financial institutions who finance us on that basis. And nobody wants to import fertilizer and it's sitting in the warehouse 1 year later unsold, because you've got storage charges, you've got interest charges, and all these just build up and build up. So you find people, there's been a lot of scale back in private sector imports. In 5 years, we should really have set up also a nitrogen plant. We must follow what Southeast Asia did, the Singapores of this world, the Malaysias of this world. We can never, as Africans, progress anywhere until we start doing the manufacturing ourselves. And right now, like you said, for that farmer, whenever we're at the mercy of the international markets, we'll never progress. And that's why we must build our own facilities, because then we have more predictability. So you have raw materials, so 6 months going forward, this is the price you're going to have. So we want to do that both for phosphates through this NPK granulation plant, and also for nitrogens when we set up this CAN plant. Predictability and then a manufacturing base, which will create a job for our people, revenue base for our governments, and growth and more predictability. So that's where we see ourselves, and that's a service which we envision ourselves doing 5 years going forward.